The doors of the great hall swung open with a sound like thunder, and every eye in the room turned toward the woman standing frozen at the entrance. Elena Voss had been called before the Pack Council many times, but never like this. Never with guards on either side of her, and never with the Alpha King himself standing on the raised platform, his face carved from stone. "Elena Voss," Damien Blackthorne said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "you are no longer welcome within these lands." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She searched his eyes for some sign that this was a mistake, some flicker of the man she thought she had begun to know over the past 3 years of serving in his household. She found nothing but a cold, unreadable wall. "I don't understand," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "What have I done?" "You have done nothing," Damien answered, and for one brief second, something cracked behind his eyes. "This is not about what you have done. It is about what you are." The words hit her like a blow. What she was. She had always known she was different, always felt a strange pull toward the forest behind the estate, always sensed something restless stirring beneath her skin, on nights when the moon hung low and full. But she had never spoken of it to anyone, had buried it so deep she almost convinced herself it was nothing more than a strange dream. "Take her to the border," Damien ordered, turning his face away, as if he could not bear to look at her a moment longer. "By sunrise, she is to be gone from Blackthorn land." 2 guards stepped forward, their expressions unreadable, though one of them, a broad-shouldered man named Cade, hesitated for just a moment, before placing a hand on Elena's arm. His grip was firm but not unkind. "Come with me," Cade said quietly. "It will be easier if you don't fight this." Elena wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers, wanted to plant her feet and refuse to move, until someone explained why the man who had once looked at her with something like warmth was now casting her out like a stranger. But the weight of dozens of watching eyes pressed down on her, and her legs carried her toward the door before her mind had caught up. As she passed the platform, she looked up one last time at Damien. He was not looking at her. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped beneath his skin, and his hands, gripping the edge of the throne, were shaking. She did not know that beneath his composed exterior, something inside him was screaming. The moment the great doors closed behind her, Damien's control shattered. He gripped the arms of his throne until the wood groaned in protest. His council members shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. It was his advisor, an older wolf named Edward, who finally dared to approach him. "My king," Edward said carefully, "it is done. She will be gone by morning." Damien said nothing. He could not speak, not with the storm raging inside his chest. His wolf, the ancient and powerful spirit bound to his very soul, had gone still and silent the moment Elena walked out of the hall. That silence was worse than any howl of rage. It felt like grief. It felt like something had been ripped away and left an empty, aching hollow in its place. "Leave me," Damien finally managed to say. The council members filed out one by one, casting uncertain glances at their king, before disappearing through the side doors. Edward lingered a moment longer, concern etched into the lines of his weathered face, before he too withdrew, leaving Damien alone, with the silence and the throne that suddenly felt too heavy to bear. Damien rose and walked to the tall window overlooking the Packlands. Moonlight spilled over the dark treetops, painting the world in silver. Somewhere out there, Elena was being led toward the border, toward a life beyond the only home she had ever known, and he had been the one to send her there. He pressed his palm against the cold glass. "I did this to protect you," he whispered, though there was no one to hear him. "You will never know how much this costs me." His wolf stirred at last, a low and mournful sound rising from somewhere deep within him. Not words exactly, but something close enough. It was a plea, a demand. "Go after her. Bring her back. She belongs here. She belongs with us." Damien closed his eyes and fought the urge with everything he had. He thought of his mother, of the worn pages of the old prophecy scrolls locked away in the estate's private archive, of the warning she had given him years before her death. A wolf born of human blood and hidden lineage will either unite the packs or burn them to ash, and the Alpha who loves her carries the weight of that choice. He had spent years believing the prophecy was nothing more than an old fear, passed down through generations, a story meant to frighten young pups into obedience. But 3 months ago, everything had changed. He had caught the faintest trace of moonlight magic clinging to Elena's skin, a signature so old and so rare that he knew instantly what it meant. She was not simply a servant girl who had wandered into his household by chance. She was the one his mother had warned him about. And now, because of what he knew, he had sent her away with nothing but a satchel and a broken heart, hoping against hope that distance would keep her safe from a war she did not even know was coming. Elena walked in silence beside Cade as they made their way through the quiet corridors of the estate toward the servants' quarters, where she would gather what little she owned before being escorted to the border. Her mind spun with questions that had no answers. What was she? Why did her presence threaten an entire kingdom? And why, despite everything, did some small and foolish part of her still ache for the man who had just thrown her out of his life? "You're stronger than you think," Cade said suddenly, breaking the silence. Elena glanced at him, surprised. That's an odd thing to say to someone who just got exiled. "Maybe," Cade admitted, "but I've served this pack a long time. I've seen the king make hard choices before, choices that hurt people close to him, because he believed it was the only way to keep them safe. This feels the same." "That doesn't make it hurt less," Elena said quietly. Cade didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "No, I suppose it doesn't." They reached her small room at the edge of the servants' hall, a modest space with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the eastern gardens. Elena packed quickly, her hands trembling as she folded the few dresses she owned, and tucked away a small wooden box containing the only thing she had left of her parents, a tarnished silver locket she had never been able to open. As she reached for her satchel, a sudden wave of dizziness swept over her, so intense that she had to grip the edge of the bed to keep from falling. A strange heat rushed beneath her skin, pooling in her chest before spreading outward like wildfire. She gasped, pressing a hand against her ribs. "Elena?" Cade's voice sharpened with concern. He crossed the room in 2 strides. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she managed, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "Something feels wrong. Like something is trying to break out of me." Cade's eyes widened slightly, though he quickly masked his reaction. He had heard stories, whispered among the older pack members, about the signs of a first shift, about the way it could strike without warning in moments of extreme stress or fear. He had never actually witnessed one, but the way Elena's skin seemed to shimmer faintly in the low candlelight told him everything he needed to know. "We need to get you outside," he said urgently. "Now." "Why? What's happening to me?" "I'll explain everything. But right now, trust me. Please." Something in his tone convinced her. She grabbed her satchel with shaking hands and followed him out through a side door that led into the gardens, the cool night air hitting her flushed skin like a balm. The moon hung high above them, full and radiant, bathing the world in silver light. Elena stumbled to a stop beneath an old oak tree, gripping its trunk for support as another wave of heat rolled through her body. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to tilt and shift, as though she were seeing it through someone else's eyes. "Oh, Cade," she gasped, "something is really wrong with me." "You're not sick," Cade said gently, keeping his distance but staying close enough to help if she needed him. "You're changing. It's your wolf. She's waking up." "My wolf?" Elena's voice cracked with confusion and fear. "I don't have a wolf. I'm human." "You're not," Cade said, his voice steady, despite the shock evident in his eyes. "I don't know how or why, but you're not human, Elena. Not entirely." Before she could respond, another wave of heat crashed through her, stronger than before, and this time, it did not fade. Her bones seemed to shift beneath her skin, an agonizing, disorienting sensation that made her cry out and drop to her knees on the soft grass. Cade knelt beside her, but did not touch her, unsure of what such contact might do during such a fragile and dangerous moment. "Let it happen," he urged softly. "Fighting it will only make it worse. Trust your body. It knows what to do." Tears streamed down Elena's face as fear and confusion warred within her, but somewhere beneath the panic, she felt something else stirring, something ancient and patient that had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. She stopped fighting. She let go. The transformation that followed was unlike anything she could have imagined, painful and strange, but also, in some small way, deeply familiar, as though her body was simply remembering something it had always known how to do. When it was over, she knelt on the grass, in the shape of a wolf, her fur pale silver beneath the moonlight, her breath coming in ragged pants. Cade stared at her, stunned into silence. He had suspected, but seeing it confirmed with his own eyes was something else entirely. The pale color of her fur, the strange shimmer of moonlight clinging to her form, it all matched the old stories exactly. "You're moon-blessed," he whispered, almost to himself. The king was right to be afraid. Elena, still lost in the disorienting rush of her new form, could not yet understand what those words meant. All she knew was that something inside her had finally been set free, and there was no going back to the life she had known before. Far away, within the walls of the estate, Damien felt it the instant it happened, a sudden and violent surge through the bond he had spent months trying to deny existed. His wolf let out a sound that was not quite a howl, and not quite a cry, something raw and primal, that echoed through his very soul. She had shifted, she had awakened, and somewhere out there, beyond the borders he had forced her across, the woman he had sent away was no longer entirely human, and he was no longer able to pretend that the danger he feared could be avoided simply by keeping his distance. He gripped the window frame so hard the wood splintered beneath his fingers. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to find her, to protect her from whatever came next. But he had made his choice, and now he would have to live with the consequences of a decision that, deep down, he already knew had been the wrong one. Outside, beneath the same moon that watched over them both, Elena rose unsteadily onto 4 unfamiliar legs, and somewhere in the primal, instinctive corner of her new mind, she understood one simple, undeniable truth. She was not finished with the Blackthorn pack, and no matter how far Damien Blackthorn tried to send her, some part of her would always be pulled back toward him, just as his wolf was pulled toward her. The night stretched on, quiet and watchful, holding its breath for whatever was coming. Dawn broke pale and cold over the eastern hills, as Elena walked the narrow dirt road leading away from Blackthorn territory. Her paws had long since returned to human feet, the shift fading as exhaustion took hold, but the memory of it still hummed beneath her skin, like a struck bell that would not fall silent. Cade walked a few steps behind her, quiet and watchful, though she could feel his eyes on her back the entire time. "You don't have to keep following me," she said without turning around. "Your orders were to see me to the border. I think we passed it hours ago." "My orders were to see you safely away from Packlands," Cade corrected. Safely is the important word. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. The morning light caught the tired lines beneath her eyes, but there was a new sharpness to her expression, something that had not been there the day before. "Then explain something to me. What am I? And don't tell me you don't know, because I saw your face last night. You knew exactly what was happening to me." Cade let out a long breath and glanced around the empty road before answering, as if the trees themselves might be listening. "There are old stories, passed down through the founding packs, about a bloodline that vanished generations ago. A line called Moon-Blessed, wolves born with a connection to the moon itself, stronger and rarer than any ordinary shifter. The stories say the line was hunted nearly to extinction because of what its wolves could do, and because of what their existence meant for the future of every pack." "What could they do?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Unite packs that had been enemies for centuries. Or, if things went wrong, tear them apart completely. It depended on the choices made around them, not just by them." Cade studied her carefully. "Your fur last night, the way the moonlight seemed to cling to you even after you shifted back, that's not something I've ever seen in an ordinary wolf. I believe you're one of them, Elena, maybe the last one." Elena wrapped her arms tighter around herself, the morning chill suddenly feeling much colder. "That still doesn't explain why the king would send me away because of it. If what you're saying is true, wouldn't he want someone like that close to him? Someone who could help unite the packs?" "That depends on what kind of unity he's afraid of losing," Cade said quietly, "or what kind of war he's afraid of starting." Before Elena could ask what he meant, a sharp crack echoed from the tree line to their left, followed by the low, unmistakable growl of another wolf. Cade's entire body went rigid, and he stepped in front of Elena in a single fluid motion, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. "Get behind me," he said, his voice suddenly hard and commanding. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line, their coats a mottled gray and brown, their eyes fixed on Elena, with an intensity that made her stomach twist. These were not Blackthorn wolves. She had never seen them before, and something about the way they moved, coordinated and deliberate, told her this was no chance encounter. Ashgrove scouts, Cade muttered under his breath. They must have been watching the border. Why would they be watching for me? Elena asked, panic creeping into her voice. I don't know, Cade admitted. But we're not staying to find out. The largest of the three wolves lunged forward without warning, and Cade met the attack head-on, shifting mid-motion into his own wolf form with practiced ease, a powerful dark-furred beast that crashed into the smaller wolf with bone-jarring force. Elena stumbled backward, her heart hammering as the two remaining wolves began to circle her, their lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth. Run! Cade snarled through his shifted jaws, though the word came out garbled and rough. Elena, run now! But her legs would not move. Fear had rooted her to the spot, and as one of the wolves lunged toward her, she felt that same strange heat begin to build beneath her skin again, faster this time, more urgent, as though her body understood the danger before her mind fully processed it. She threw her arms up instinctively, and in the space of a single heartbeat, her human form dissolved into fur and claws, her instincts taking over where her conscious thought failed. The wolf that had lunged at her met her clumsy but startlingly effective counterattack, her sharp new claws catching against its shoulder as she twisted away from its snapping jaws. She had no training, no experience, nothing but raw instinct guiding her movements, but it was enough to keep her alive in those first terrifying seconds. Cade, having dispatched the first attacker with a decisive blow, turned just in time to see Elena holding her own against the second wolf, and something like pride flickered through his exhaustion. He surged toward the third wolf, driving it back with a series of powerful strikes until it yelped and retreated into the tree line, followed quickly by its wounded companion. Silence fell over the road once more, broken only by the ragged breathing of both survivors. Elena shifted back to her human form, dropping to her knees in the dirt, her arms shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline began to fade. They're gone, Cade said, shifting back as well and kneeling beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. But they'll report what they saw. Whoever sent them will know now that you've awakened. Why does that matter so much? Elena asked, tears of exhaustion and fear finally slipping free. Why does everyone want something from me before I even understand what I am? Cade did not have a good answer for her, and for a long moment, he simply sat beside her in silence, letting her catch her breath. Finally he spoke, his voice gentler than before. We need to get you somewhere safe. There's a town not far from here, just across the human border. We can rest there, and I can send word back to the estate. Send word to who? Elena asked bitterly. The king who threw me out? Yes, Cade said simply. Because whether you want to believe it or not, Elena, I don't think he wanted to send you away. I think he believed he had no other choice. Miles away, within the private chambers of the Blackthorn estate, Damien stood frozen at the center of the room, his entire body trembling with the force of what he had just felt through the bond, the attack, the fear. The desperate surge of Elena's newly awakened wolf, fighting for survival. Every instinct in him screamed to shift, to run, to tear through the forest until he found her. But a lifetime of discipline held him in place, if only barely. Edward entered the chamber without knocking, his expression grim. My king, a message just arrived from one of our border scouts. There was an attack near the eastern road, close to where Cade was escorting the girl. Is she alive? Damien's voice came out low and dangerous, barely recognizable even to himself. The scout believes so, yes. Cade fought off the attackers, though he suspects there will be more. Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides. Ashgrove? Edward hesitated before nodding. It fits the pattern we've been seeing along the border these past months. If they've somehow learned about the prophecy, about what she might be, they would want to eliminate her before she could ever pose a threat to their ambitions. Or before she could stand in the way of them starting exactly the kind of war they want, Damien said grimly. He turned to face the window once more, staring out at the dark line of trees where, somewhere beyond, Elena was fighting for her life because of choices he had made. My king, Edward said carefully, if I may ask, why did you send her away, instead of simply protecting her here, within our own walls? Damien was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I believed distance would keep the truth hidden a little longer. I believed if she never fully awakened, if she never learned what she was, The packs that hunted her bloodline might never learn either. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. I should have known that fate does not wait for convenient timing. What will you do now? Damien's jaw tightened, and when he turned back to face his advisor, there was a fierce and unshakable resolve burning in his eyes. I am going to bring her home. Whatever war is coming, she will not face it alone, and neither will I. Edward studied his king for a long moment before nodding slowly. I will ready the guard. No, Damien said. I go alone. This is my mistake to correct, and I will not risk more lives until I understand the full scope of what we're facing. As Edward departed to prepare for his king's departure despite his private misgivings, Damien remained by the window a moment longer, feeling the faint, fragile thread of the bond still pulsing between himself and Elena, weakened by distance but never fully severed. He pressed a hand against his chest, where his wolf stirred with something that felt almost like hope for the first time since she had walked out of the great hall. Hold on, he thought, hoping somehow the words might reach her across the miles. I am coming. Please hold on. In the small border town where Cade had led her, Elena sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket inside a quiet inn room, staring at her own trembling hands, as though they belonged to someone else. The events of the past day replayed endlessly in her mind. The rejection, the shift, the attack, each piece settling into her like stones sinking into deep water. You should rest, Cade said gently, from where he stood near the door, keeping watch. Whatever comes next, you'll need your strength. What comes next? Elena asked quietly. You said you'd send word back to the estate. Do you really think he'll come? Cade considered the question carefully before answering. I think the man you rejected in that hall, the king who ordered your exile, is not the same man who has been quietly grieving something he cannot explain since the moment you walked out that door. I think he will come, Elena. I think he never really wanted you gone at all. Elena said nothing, but as exhaustion finally pulled her toward an uneasy sleep, some small and reluctant part of her allowed herself to hope that Cade was right, even as another part of her, still raw from humiliation and fear, wondered whether she would even want to see Damien Blackthorne again when he finally arrived. Outside, the moon began its slow descent toward the horizon, indifferent to the storm of choices and consequences unfolding beneath its silver light, though somewhere deep within both Elena and Damien, their bonded wolves remained restless, aching, and undeniably drawn toward one another, despite everything that had been said and done between them. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the inn room when Elena finally woke, her body aching in places she had not known could hurt. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened, until the memory of fur and claws and the desperate scramble for survival came rushing back all at once. She sat up quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Easy, Cade said from a chair near the window, where he had clearly kept watch through the night. You're safe, for now. For now, Elena repeated, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. That seems to be the only kind of safe I get these days. Cade offered a tired but genuine smile. I brought you something to eat. You'll need it. Shifting for the first time drains the body more than most people realize. Elena accepted the small plate of bread and cheese he handed her, though her stomach felt too knotted with anxiety to feel much hunger. She picked at the food quietly, her mind circling back again and again to the strange new truth of what she was, and what it might mean for the rest of her life. Cade, she said finally, if what you told me is true, if I really am part of this moon-blessed line, why did no one ever tell me? My parents never said anything. I grew up believing I was completely human. It's possible they didn't know, Cade said. Or it's possible they knew and chose to hide it, to protect you. Bloodlines like yours were hunted for generations. If your family went into hiding, keeping the truth from you might have been the only way to keep you alive long enough to grow up at all. Elena absorbed this in silence, turning the idea over in her mind. It ached in a strange way, the thought that her entire life might have been shaped by a secret she never knew existed, a secret so dangerous it had cost her parents everything, though she still did not fully understand why. A sudden knock at the door made them both go still. Cade rose immediately, positioning himself between Elena and the entrance, his body tense and ready. Who is it? He called out. It's me, came a familiar voice from the other side, low and rough with exhaustion. Open the door, Cade. Elena's heart stopped. She would have known that voice anywhere. Cade glanced back at her, silently asking permission, and after a long hesitation, she nodded. He opened the door, and Damien Blackthorne stepped inside, travel-worn and haggard, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by the dust and strain of a long, hard ride. For a moment, no one spoke. Damien's eyes found Elena immediately, and something in his expression shifted. Relief and guilt and longing, all tangled together, in a way that made her chest tighten painfully. "You came," Elena said finally, her voice flat, guarded. "Of course I came," Damien said, taking a step toward her before stopping himself, as though unsure whether he had any right to close the distance between them. "The moment I felt what happened, I could not stay away." "Felt what happened?" Elena's eyebrows drew together. "What does that mean?" Damien hesitated, glancing briefly at Cade, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "There is a bond," Damien said carefully, "between fated mates. Even an incomplete one, even one that has been rejected, carries a thread of connection. When you were attacked, I felt your fear as though it were my own." Elena stared at him, a dozen conflicting emotions warring across her face. "You rejected me in front of your entire pack. You sent me away with nothing, and now you're telling me we're supposed to be mates?" "Yes," Damien admitted, his voice low with shame. "And I understand, if you can never forgive me for what I did. But I need you to understand why I did it." "Then explain it to me," Elena said, folding her arms. "Because so far, all I have are second-hand stories from Cade, about ancient prophecies and dangerous bloodlines. I want to hear it from you." Damien took a slow breath, steadying himself before he spoke. "My mother, before she died, left behind old records, warnings passed down through generations of Blackthorne alphas. They spoke of a bloodline called Moonblessed, wolves born with a connection to the moon so powerful, it could shift the balance between every pack in these lands. The record said that when such a wolf awakened fully, bonded to an alpha, the packs would face a choice: unity beyond anything ever seen, or a war so devastating it could tear the entire wolf nation apart. And you decided which outcome was more likely, all on your own, without ever telling me any of this," Elena said, her voice sharp with hurt. "You decided I was too dangerous to even know the truth." "I was trying to protect you," Damien said, his voice cracking slightly. "I believed if you never fully awakened, if you lived quietly, away from pack politics, you would be safe from packs like Ashgrove, who would kill you the moment they suspected what you might become. Well, your plan failed," Elena said bitterly. "I awakened anyway, and now Ashgrove already knows exactly what I am. Your rejection didn't protect me at all. It just left me alone and confused when it happened." Damien flinched at the truth in her words, and for a long moment, he said nothing, the weight of his failure settling heavily across his shoulders. "You're right," he finally admitted. "I made the wrong choice, Elena. I let fear guide me instead of trusting you, or trusting myself, to face whatever came next together." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the town waking up outside the window. Cade shifted uncomfortably near the door, clearly feeling like an intruder in a moment that belonged only to the two of them, though he made no move to leave. "What happens now?" Elena asked finally, her anger softening slightly beneath the weight of everything she had learned. "If Ashgrove already knows about me, if this war you feared is already starting, what do we do?" Damien met her eyes steadily. "Now, I make sure you are never left unprotected again, whether or not you ever choose to forgive me. I will not force you back to Blackthorne lands if you do not wish to return, but I will not leave your side until I know you are safe." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of the deception she feared might still be hiding there, but found only exhaustion and quiet, aching sincerity. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said honestly. "Not yet." "That's fair," Damien said softly. "I don't expect you to. I only ask for the chance to earn it back." Cade cleared his throat gently, breaking the heavy tension in the room. "As much as I hate to interrupt, we should discuss practical matters. If Ashgrove scouts already know Elena has awakened, they will not stop searching for her. Staying in this town for long is not safe for any of us." Damien nodded, his focus shifting immediately into the sharp, decisive mindset of a king, used to making difficult decisions under pressure. "We need somewhere secure, somewhere Ashgrove would not think to look, at least until we understand the full scope of their intentions. There's an old hunting lodge, deep in the neutral forest between our territories," Cade suggested, "rarely used, well hidden. It could serve as a temporary refuge while we figure out our next move. Then that is where we go, Damien said, glancing at Elena for confirmation. If you're willing. Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding. Not out of trust exactly, but out of the simple, practical understanding that she had few better options available to her. Fine. But I want answers, Damien. All of them. No more secrets. You have my word, Damien said solemnly. No more secrets. As they prepared to leave the safety of the small inn room, none of them noticed the shadow lingering just beyond the window, a lone figure watching from the street below, having tracked their movements since the previous night. The figure melted back into the crowded town square the moment Damien glanced toward the window, disappearing before any of them could catch even a glimpse of who had been watching, or why. The road to the hunting lodge wound deep into unclaimed forest, thick with old-growth trees that blocked out much of the midday sun, casting the path in a perpetual dusk that matched the uneasy mood of the small group traveling through it. Elena walked slightly apart from the two wolves, still processing everything she had learned, while Damien and Cade remained alert, scanning the tree line for any sign of pursuit. You're quiet, Damien said eventually, falling into step beside her as they crossed a narrow stream. I have a lot to think about, Elena replied, not unkindly, though her tone remained guarded. Yesterday, I was a servant girl who didn't understand why her body sometimes felt too small for whatever lived beneath her skin. Today I'm apparently the key to some ancient prophecy that could start a war between wolf packs I didn't even know existed. I know it's overwhelming, Damien said gently. I wish I could have given you time to adjust to the truth slowly, instead of everything happening all at once like this. You could have, Elena pointed out. You could have told me the truth months ago, instead of letting me find out through humiliation and violence. Damien had no response to that, because she was right, and they both knew it. They continued walking in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the rustle of leaves overhead and the distant call of birds settling in for the evening. Finally, as the outline of the old hunting lodge came into view through the trees, weathered wood and a sagging roof suggesting years of neglect, Elena spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I'm scared, Damien. Not just of Ashgrove, or of some war I don't understand. I'm scared of what I'm becoming, and I don't know how to stop being scared when everyone keeps telling me I'm something powerful and dangerous, all at the same time. Damien stopped walking, and turned to face her fully, his expression softening into something achingly sincere. You are not a weapon, Elena, and you are not a monster. Whatever the prophecy says, whatever choice lies ahead of us, you are still the same woman who has always shown kindness to everyone around her, even when she had every reason not to. That has not changed, no matter what your wolf can do. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile beginnings of understanding. I want to believe that, she admitted quietly. Then let me help you believe it, Damien said, one day at a time, if that's what it takes. As they finally reached the lodge and Cade moved ahead to check the perimeter for any signs of danger, Elena allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine a future where the fear and confusion of the past 2 days might eventually give way to something steadier, though she knew the road ahead remained long, uncertain, and far from safe. The hunting lodge smelled of old wood and dust, but Cade quickly set about clearing the main room, sweeping away cobwebs and lighting a fire in the stone hearth, while Damien checked the shuttered windows for any weaknesses in the structure's defenses. Elena stood near the entrance, arms wrapped around herself, watching the two men work with an unsettled feeling she could not quite name. It isn't much, Cade said, glancing over his shoulder at her, but it's hidden well, and it will keep the rain off our heads for however long we need to stay. It's fine, Elena said quietly, though her mind was elsewhere, still turning over everything she had learned in the past 2 days. She moved to the small window near the fire and looked out at the darkening tree line, half expecting to see shadows moving among the trunks, remnants of the fear that had followed her since the attack on the road. Damien noticed her tension and crossed the room to stand a respectful distance away. You should try to rest. Whatever comes tomorrow, you'll need your strength. I keep hearing that, Elena said with a tired half-smile. Rest, eat, gather your strength. Nobody seems to want to talk about what actually happens after that. Because none of us fully know yet, Damien admitted honestly. But I promise you, whatever it is, you will not face it without allies at your side. Elena studied him for a long moment, the firelight casting soft shadows across his face, softening the hard lines of worry that had been etched there since he arrived at the inn. "Tell me about the prophecy," she said finally. "All of it. Not the parts you think I can handle. All of it." Damien hesitated, glancing toward Cade, who gave a small nod of encouragement before quietly excusing himself to check the lodge's perimeter once more, leaving the two of them alone by the fire. "The full prophecy," Damien began slowly, "speaks of a wolf born from a hidden bloodline, marked by moonlight itself, who would awaken during a time of deep unrest among the packs. It says her bond with an alpha would determine the fate of every pack in these lands, unity strong enough to end centuries of conflict, or a war so devastating it would leave the wolf nations in ruins for generations. That's a lot of weight to put on one bond," Elena said quietly. "It is," Damien agreed. "And for months, I told myself the prophecy was exaggerated, an old story, meant to frighten young pups, nothing more. But then I met you, and I felt something I had never felt before, something ancient and undeniable, and I began to fear that the old warnings might hold more truth than I wanted to believe." "So you rejected me, instead of trusting whatever this bond was trying to tell you," Elena said, though there was less anger in her voice now, more simple sadness. "Yes," Damien admitted. "I convinced myself that keeping you at a distance, denying the bond before it could fully form, would somehow prevent the darker outcome from ever coming to pass. I thought if you never learned what you were, you might live a quiet, peaceful life, far from the dangers that come with power like yours. And now? Now I understand that fear-driven choices rarely lead anywhere good," Damien said quietly. "I should have trusted you enough to make this choice together, instead of making it for you and calling it protection." The fire crackled softly between them, filling the silence that followed his words. Elena studied the flames for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. Part of me wants to be furious with you. Part of me understands why you were afraid. And another part of me," she paused, glancing at him almost shyly, "feels something I don't fully understand, something that pulls me toward you even when every rational thought in my head tells me I should stay far away." "That's the bond," Damien said softly. "Even rejected, even strained by everything that's happened, it doesn't simply disappear. It waits, patient and persistent, for a chance to heal." Elena wrapped her arms tighter around herself, though this time it seemed less like a defensive gesture and more like an attempt to hold in the fragile, uncertain feelings stirring within her chest. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to figure out who I am now, separate from prophecies and bonds and everything else. Can you give me that?" "For as long as you need," Damien promised. And despite everything, Elena believed him. Outside, the forest had fallen into full darkness, the moon rising slowly above the tree line, casting its familiar silver glow across the small clearing where the hunting lodge stood hidden from the world. Cade completed his patrol of the perimeter and paused at the edge of the trees, his sharp senses catching a faint but unmistakable scent carried on the evening breeze, foreign, unfamiliar, and unsettlingly close. He crouched low, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, but found nothing beyond the ordinary sounds of the forest settling into night. Still, the scent lingered in his memory as he made his way back toward the lodge, a quiet unease settling over him that he chose not to voice to the others just yet, not until he understood exactly what, or who, might be watching them from the shadows. Inside, Elena had finally allowed herself to succumb to exhaustion, curling up near the fire beneath a worn blanket Cade had found tucked away in an old storage chest. Damien remained awake, sitting a respectful distance away, watching over her with quiet, unwavering vigilance, his wolf finally settling into something resembling peace now that she was close enough to protect. He knew the peace would not last. Whatever Ashgrove was planning, whatever the prophecy still had in store for them, the calm of this single night in a hidden forest lodge was likely to be a rare and fleeting gift. But for now, watching Elena sleep peacefully for the first time since her world had been turned upside down, Damien allowed himself a small, quiet moment of hope, fragile but real, that perhaps the darker outcome of the old prophecy was not as inevitable as he had once feared. The following morning brought with it a tense energy that none of them could ignore. Cade returned from an early patrol with news that confirmed his suspicions from the night before. Fresh tracks near the eastern boundary of the forest, careful and deliberate. clearly belonging to more than one wolf attempting to move unnoticed through the underbrush. "They found us already?" Elena asked, her voice tight with anxiety, as she gathered her few belongings, prepared to move at a moment's notice. "Not necessarily found," Cade clarified, "but they're searching this area, which means they suspect we might be here. We should assume the worst and prepare accordingly." Damien's expression hardened into the sharp, focused resolve of a leader assessing a dangerous situation. "How many tracks?" "At least 4, possibly more, that I couldn't identify clearly," Cade reported. "Ashgrove scouts, based on the pattern of movement. Skilled, but not overly cautious. They don't yet know exactly where we are." "Then we have a small advantage, if we act quickly," Damien said. "Elena, can you shift again? Controlled, this time, rather than instinct alone?" Elena hesitated, memories of the painful, disorienting first shift still fresh in her mind. "I don't know. I've only done it twice, both times out of pure fear or survival instinct. I don't know if I can do it on purpose." "You won't be alone," Damien said gently. "I'll help guide you through it, if you're willing to try." Despite her lingering uncertainty about their relationship, Elena found herself nodding, some part of her recognizing that whatever complicated feelings remained between them, survival required trust, at least for now. "All right, show me." Damien guided her through slow, measured breathing, helping her focus on the low hum of energy beneath her skin, rather than fighting against it, as she had during moments of panic. Gradually, with his steady voice grounding her, Elena felt the shift begin to build, gentler this time, more controlled, until her human form dissolved smoothly into the pale silver wolf that had emerged the night everything changed. She stood on 4 steady legs, breathing deeply, a strange sense of calm washing over her, despite the danger closing in around them. For the first time since her awakening, she felt not fear, but a quiet, growing confidence in the strength now living within her. Cade, watching from a short distance away, allowed himself a small, relieved smile. "Better," he said approvingly. "Much better." Damien, still in his human form, met Elena's wolf eyes with quiet pride. "Now," he said, his voice low and determined, "let's make sure Ashgrove regrets ever coming looking for us." Together, the 3 of them moved swiftly and silently through the forest, prepared to face whatever danger awaited them, no longer strangers bound together by circumstance alone, but something closer to allies, united by a shared purpose that none of them fully understood yet, though all of them sensed its importance growing with every passing hour. The forest floor was damp beneath their paws, as Elena, Damien, and Cade moved in careful formation toward the eastern boundary where the scouts' tracks had been discovered. Elena's new wolf form still felt foreign to her, every muscle unfamiliar, every sense sharper and stranger than anything she had known in her human body. Yet there was an undeniable thrill beneath the fear, a sense of power she had never known she possessed. Cade took the lead, his dark fur blending seamlessly into the shadows of the underbrush, while Damien flanked Elena protectively, his golden eyes constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. They had gone perhaps half a mile when Cade suddenly froze, his ears pinning back against his skull. A low growl rippled through the trees ahead, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps moving with deliberate stealth. Damien's muscles coiled with readiness, and Elena felt her own heart rate spike, adrenaline flooding through her veins as instinct began to take over where conscious thought struggled to keep pace. The first Ashgrove scout emerged from the shadows without warning, a lean gray wolf with cold, calculating eyes that immediately locked onto Elena. Before anyone could react, 2 more scouts appeared from either side, effectively surrounding the small group in a pincer formation that spoke of careful planning rather than chance encounter. "They knew exactly where to find us," Cade snarled, positioning himself protectively in front of Elena. "There's no time to wonder how," Damien growled back. "Fight now, questions later." The gray wolf lunged first, targeting Elena directly, clearly recognizing her as the primary objective of their mission. Elena's instincts screamed at her to run, but something deeper, something ancient and unyielding, refused to let fear control her actions. She met the attack head-on, twisting at the last possible moment to avoid the worst of the impact while raking her claws along the scout's exposed flank. The wolf yelped in pain and stumbled back, clearly surprised by the ferocity of her counterattack. Behind her, Damien engaged a second scout in a brutal, fast-paced struggle, while Cade held off the third with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned warrior. Elena pressed her advantage, driven by an instinct she did not fully understand, striking again before the wounded scout could recover its footing. The wolf let out a pained cry and retreated into the underbrush, clearly deciding the fight was no longer worth the cost. "Elena, behind you." Cade's warning came just in time for her to spin around and avoid a fourth scout she had not noticed, emerging silently from the trees behind them, having circled around during the chaos of the initial confrontation. This new attacker was larger, more experienced, and moved with the kind of controlled aggression that told Elena immediately she was facing a far more dangerous opponent than the previous scout. She backed away instinctively, searching for an opening, but the wolf pressed its advantage relentlessly, driving her toward a fallen tree that limited her ability to maneuver. Just as the wolf lunged for what would have been a decisive strike, Damien appeared from the chaos of his own fight, intercepting the attack with his full body weight, sending both wolves crashing into the underbrush in a tangle of snarling fury. Elena watched in horror as Damien fought fiercely against the larger scout, taking a vicious bite to his shoulder, before finally managing to pin the attacker beneath his greater strength and experience. The remaining Ashgrove scouts, seeing their companions defeated or driven back, exchanged quick, wary glances before retreating rapidly into the deeper shadows of the forest, abandoning the fight rather than risk further losses. Silence descended over the small clearing, broken only by the ragged breathing of the three exhausted wolves. Elena shifted back to her human form first, rushing immediately to Damien's side as he too returned to his human shape, wincing as he pressed a hand against the bloody wound on his shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, kneeling beside him, her voice tight with worry despite everything unresolved between them. "It's not as bad as it looks," Damien said, though his grimace suggested otherwise. "We need to keep moving. There will be more of them soon." Cade, favoring one leg slightly from a wound of his own, helped Damien to his feet, while Elena supported his other side, the three of them moving as quickly as their injuries allowed back toward the relative safety of the hunting lodge. Once inside, Cade quickly set about tending to Damien's wound, with supplies from an old medical kit stored at the lodge, while Elena hovered nearby, unable to shake the memory of watching Damien throw himself into danger to protect her. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, watching Cade clean and bandage the deep bite mark on Damien's shoulder. "You could have let me handle that scout myself." "I could have," Damien agreed, wincing as Cade tightened the bandage. "But I wasn't willing to take that risk. Not when I had the chance to prevent it." "Even after everything? Even after you sent me away?" Elena's voice cracked slightly with the weight of unresolved emotion. Damien met her eyes steadily, despite the pain evident on his face. "Especially after everything. I made a mistake once already, by trying to protect you through distance instead of trust. I refuse to make that same mistake twice." Elena said nothing for a long moment, simply studying him, searching for the deception she had once feared might still be lurking beneath his words, but finding only quiet, unwavering sincerity. Something inside her, some small, guarded part of her heart, began to soften just slightly. "Thank you," she said finally, the words simple, but carrying far more weight than their brevity suggested. Cade, finishing the last of the bandaging, glanced between the two of them with quiet understanding, before rising to his feet. "I'll take first watch," he said diplomatically, moving toward the door to give them a moment of privacy neither of them had asked for, but both seemed to need. Once he had gone, Elena remained kneeling beside Damien, the firelight casting a warm glow across both their faces. "This bond," she said slowly, "the one you say connects us, even after everything. Does it ever go away completely?" "I don't believe so," Damien admitted. "Not fully. It can be denied, resisted, even rejected outwardly, as I foolishly tried to do. But the connection itself, the recognition between two souls meant to be together, that does not simply disappear." "And what happens now, to this bond?" Damien studied her carefully before answering, choosing his words with obvious care. "That depends entirely on you, Elena. I will not push you towards something you're not ready for, no matter how deeply my wolf longs to complete what was started the moment we first met. This is your choice to make, in your own time." Elena absorbed this quietly, appreciating the restraint in his words even as something within her, some quiet, insistent pull she could not fully explain, urged her to lean just slightly closer to him, despite everything unresolved between them. "I'm not ready yet," she admitted honestly. "But I don't want you to leave either. Not right now." "Then I won't," Damien said simply. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet crackle of the fire, and the lingering ache of battle wounds still healing, something fragile, but undeniably real, began to take root between them, patient and careful, unwilling to be rushed, but no longer entirely resistant to what fate seemed determined to bring together. Outside, Cade kept watch beneath the darkening sky, his thoughts turning uneasily toward the larger question neither Damien nor Elena had yet fully considered: why Ashgrove had grown bold enough to send scouts so deep into contested territory, and what exactly they were planning next, now that their attempt to eliminate Elena had failed twice in a row. 3 days passed at the Hidden Lodge, days marked by healing wounds, cautious conversations, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust between Elena and Damien. Cade maintained constant patrols around the perimeter, though no further scouts had been spotted since the confrontation in the forest, a silence that unsettled him more than open aggression would have. "They're regrouping," Cade said one evening, joining Elena and Damien by the fire after another uneventful patrol. "Ashgrove doesn't retreat without a plan. This quiet worries me more than their scouts did." "What do you think they're planning?" Elena asked, setting aside the simple wooden bowl she had been using to eat a modest meal of dried meat and foraged berries. "I don't know," Cade admitted, "but I don't like not knowing." Damien, his shoulder healing steadily beneath careful bandaging, nodded grimly in agreement. "We can't stay hidden forever. Eventually, we'll need to return to Blackthorn lands, both to strengthen our defenses and to figure out exactly what Ashgrove intends." "Won't returning put the whole pack at risk?" Elena asked. "If Ashgrove is willing to send scouts this far to find me, what happens when I'm surrounded by hundreds of other wolves they could target?" "The estate has defenses far beyond anything available out here," Damien explained. "Walls, trained guards, warning systems built over generations. It's far safer than this lodge, despite how hidden it may seem." Elena considered this, though a flicker of old anxiety crossed her features. "The last time I was within those walls, your entire council watched you cast me out. I'm not sure I'm ready to walk back through those doors." Damien's expression softened with quiet regret. "I understand your hesitation, but I promise you, Elena, if you return, it will not be as an exile. It will be as someone the pack needs to understand and protect, not fear." "Easy to promise," Elena said, though not unkindly. "Harder to guarantee, especially when your own council was ready to see me thrown out without a second thought." "Then I will make it clear to them, in no uncertain terms, exactly how wrong that decision was," Damien said firmly. "I am their king. My word carries weight, even when it corrects my own past mistakes." Cade, listening quietly to the exchange, finally spoke up. "For what it's worth, Elena, I don't think the council ever truly understood what you are. They saw only what the king presented to them, a threat to be removed. If they understood the truth, I believe many would see things differently." Elena turned this over in her mind, weighing the risk of returning against the very real danger of remaining exposed and hidden indefinitely. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right. If we're going to face whatever Ashgrove is planning, I'd rather do it with allies and proper defenses than hiding in an old lodge in the middle of nowhere." "Then we return tomorrow," Damien said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll send word ahead so the council is prepared for your arrival, and prepared to hear the truth this time, rather than assumptions built on fear." That night, as the fire burned low and Cade took the first watch outside, Elena found herself unable to sleep, her mind turning over the uncertain future awaiting her, back at the estate that had once cast her out so publicly. She rose quietly from her makeshift bed and moved to sit near the dying embers of the fire, drawing her knees up to her chest. Damien, still awake nearby, noticed her restlessness and moved to sit a respectful distance away. "Worried about tomorrow?" he asked gently. "Terrified, honestly," Elena admitted. "Everyone I once served, everyone who watched you send me away without protest, will be looking at me differently now. I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You don't have to be ready," Damien said. "You only have to be yourself, the same person who has always shown kindness and strength, regardless of circumstance. That has never required anyone's approval." Elena managed a small, tired smile. You have a way of saying exactly the right thing sometimes. I have a great deal to make up for, Damien said quietly. Choosing my words more carefully seems like a reasonable place to start. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the awkward tension of earlier days having gradually given way to something gentler, more tentative, but undeniably present between them. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice soft in the quiet night. Damien, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you first met me, before you knew anything about prophecies or bloodlines, what did you feel? Before all the fear and complications, what was it actually like? Damien considered the question carefully, his expression turning thoughtful as he recalled those earlier, simpler days. I felt like I had been waiting my whole life without realizing it, and suddenly, everything made sense in a way I couldn't fully explain. I found excuses to be near you, to hear you speak, to see you smile at the smallest, most unremarkable things. It frightened me, honestly, how quickly and completely I felt drawn to you. That doesn't sound so different from how I felt, Elena admitted quietly. I used to make excuses to walk past your study, just hoping to catch a glimpse of you working. I told myself it was foolish, that a servant girl had no business feeling anything toward the Alpha King, but I couldn't quite make myself stop. Something warm flickered in Damien's eyes at her admission, though he made no move to close the remaining distance between them, mindful of the careful boundaries Elena had asked him to respect. Perhaps, when all of this is finally resolved, we might allow ourselves the chance to simply be those two people again, without prophecies or politics standing between us. Perhaps, Elena echoed softly, allowing herself, just for a moment, to imagine such a future, however uncertain it remained beneath the looming threat of war and ancient bloodlines. The following morning, they prepared to leave the hunting lodge, the fragile peace of the past few days giving way to the sober reality of what awaited them back at Blackthorn territory. Cade led the way, alert and watchful as always, while Damien and Elena followed close behind, their earlier distance now replaced by a quiet, steady solidarity that had not existed when this journey first began. As they emerged from the forest and the familiar outline of Blackthorn territory came into view in the distance, Elena felt her heart quicken, with a complicated mixture of dread and cautious hope. Whatever awaited her within those walls, whatever judgment or acceptance the Pack Council might offer, she no longer faced it as the frightened, confused servant girl who had been cast out days before. She faced it as someone who understood, however imperfectly, exactly what she was, and who stood beside allies willing to fight for her, rather than against her. Damien glanced over at her as they walked, seeming to sense her mixed emotions. Whatever happens today, Elena, know that you do not walk through those gates alone. I know, Elena said, and for the first time since her exile, she found she truly believed it. The gates of Blackthorn territory loomed larger with every step, and Elena felt the weight of dozens of watching eyes, long before she actually saw the guards stationed along the outer wall. Word of their approach had clearly traveled ahead of them, and by the time they reached the main courtyard, a small crowd had already gathered, whispering among themselves as they took in the sight of their king returning, with the very woman he had so publicly exiled days before. Steady, Damien murmured to Elena as they walked, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Whatever they think they know, we will make certain they understand the truth before this day is finished. Elena nodded, straightening her shoulders despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had spent years serving in the shadows of this very estate, unnoticed and unremarkable. Now, every eye followed her every movement, and she forced herself to meet their curious, wary gazes, rather than shrink away from them. Edward met them at the entrance to the great hall, relief evident on his weathered face at the sight of his king returning safely. My king, thank the moon you're unharmed. When word reached us of the attack near the border, we feared the worst. We survived, thanks to quick thinking and a bit of luck, Damien said. Gather the council. I have much to explain, and I would rather do so once, in front of everyone, than repeat myself a dozen times over the coming days. Within the hour, the same great hall that had witnessed Elena's humiliating exile now filled once more with Pack Council members, their expressions ranging from curious to openly suspicious as they took their seats and waited for their king to speak. Elena stood beside Damien on the raised platform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide their trembling. while Cade remained a steady, reassuring presence just behind them. 3 days ago, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. I stood in this very room and ordered Elena Voss exiled from our lands. I told you it was necessary, that her presence posed a threat none of us fully understood. I was wrong to withhold the full truth from you then, and I intend to correct that mistake now. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council, though Damien continued without pause. Elena is not simply a servant who wandered into our household by chance. She carries the blood of the moon-blessed line, a bloodline our ancestors believed lost generations ago, one spoken of in the oldest prophecies passed down through this very pack. A tense silence fell over the hall as the weight of his words settled over the gathered council members. Finally, an older woman near the front, one of the longest-serving council members, rose slowly to her feet. My king, if this is true, why did you not simply protect her within these walls, rather than sending her into the very danger you claim to fear? Fear clouded my judgment, Damien admitted honestly, refusing to hide behind excuses. I believed distance would prevent the darker outcomes described in the old prophecies. I was wrong. My decision nearly cost Elena her life, and it accomplished nothing except unnecessary suffering for someone who deserved far better from me and from this pack. Elena, drawing on courage she had not known she possessed until recent days, stepped forward slightly, addressing the council directly for the first time. I understand many of you have questions, perhaps even fears, about what my bloodline might mean for this pack's future. I have those same questions myself. But I want you to know, whatever power I carry, whatever the old prophecies suggest, I have no desire to bring harm or division to people I have quietly served and respected for years. Her words, simple and sincere, seemed to shift something in the room, the suspicious murmurs gradually softening into thoughtful consideration. Edward, watching the exchange carefully, finally spoke up in support. I have known this pack's history longer than most in this room. The old prophecies were never meant as a certainty, only a warning, a reminder that great power requires great wisdom in how it is guided. I believe, given the courage Elena has already shown, that wisdom is not lacking here. Slowly, one by one, the council members began nodding in cautious agreement, the earlier fear and suspicion giving way to a fragile but genuine willingness to reconsider their previous judgment. Damien, watching the shift with quiet relief, addressed the hall once more. Elena will remain within Blackthorn territory, under my protection, and I ask that this council extend to her the same respect and consideration given to any other member of this pack, regardless of the circumstances of her birth. The council's murmured agreement, while not entirely unanimous, carried enough weight that Damien felt confident the immediate danger of internal division had been avoided, at least for now. As the meeting concluded, and the council members began filing out of the hall, several pausing to offer Elena hesitant but genuine nods of acknowledgement, Elena felt a tension she had not realized she was carrying finally begin to ease from her shoulders. That went better than I expected, she admitted quietly to Damien, once the hall had emptied. You handled yourself with more grace than most seasoned diplomats I've known, Damien said, a note of genuine admiration coloring his voice. The council respects courage and honesty. You gave them both today. Cade, joining them as the last of the council members departed, wore a thoughtful expression. The immediate danger here may have passed, but we still don't know what Ashgrove is planning, or why they've grown bold enough to send scouts so far into contested territory. Then we prepare, Damien said grimly. Reinforce our defenses, gather what information we can about Ashgrove's movements, and ensure Elena remains protected at all times, until we understand exactly what threat we're facing. As evening settled over the estate, Elena found herself walking alone through the familiar gardens where she had once served quietly among the flowers and hedges, though everything about her presence there now felt different, transformed by everything that had happened since she last walked these paths, as an unremarkable servant girl. She paused beside the old oak tree near the edge of the garden, remembering how just days before, this very spot had witnessed her first terrifying, uncontrolled shift. Now, standing beneath its branches with a newfound understanding of her own strength, she felt something like quiet pride replacing the fear that had once consumed her. You've come a long way in a very short time, Damien's voice came softly from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching, his earlier weariness replaced by something gentler, more hopeful. I don't feel like the same person who ran out here in a panic just days ago, Elena admitted, You're not, Damien said simply. You're becoming exactly who you were always meant to be, Elena. Whatever the old prophecies say about war or unity, I believe the choice of which outcome comes to pass rests entirely with the character of the person at its center. And I have never doubted your character, not even for a moment. Elena studied him carefully in the fading evening light, something warm and fragile stirring in her chest, despite the uncertain danger still looming on the horizon. Thank you for trusting me today, in front of everyone. Always, Damien said quietly, and though neither of them spoke of the bond still waiting patiently between them, both felt its quiet, steady presence, patient and unwavering, ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks passed at Blackthorn territory, weeks filled with careful preparation and cautious progress. Elena settled into a strange new routine, no longer a servant among the household staff, yet not entirely comfortable in the elevated position the Pack Council had reluctantly begun to grant her. She spent her mornings training with Cade, learning to control her shifts with growing confidence, and her afternoons in quiet study with Edward, absorbing everything he could teach her about the history and responsibilities tied to her newly discovered bloodline. You're improving quickly, Cade observed one morning as Elena executed a clean, controlled shift in the training yard behind the estate, her pale silver fur catching the early sunlight, faster than most wolves born into shifting from birth. Good teacher, Elena replied, once she had shifted back, offering him a genuine smile that had become easier to give with each passing day. Their training was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps, and both turned to see a young messenger approaching at a near run, his expression tight with urgency. Cade, the king requests your presence immediately, and Elena's as well. Scouts have returned with troubling news. They found Damien in his private study, hunched over a large map spread across his desk, Edward standing beside him with a similarly grave expression. What's happened? Cade asked immediately. Our scouts confirmed what we feared, Damien said grimly, gesturing to markings scattered across the map's eastern edge. Ashgrove is mobilizing, gathering forces along the contested border, in numbers far exceeding routine patrols. This isn't scouting anymore. This looks like preparation for a full assault. Elena felt a cold knot of dread settle in her stomach. Because of me. Because of fear and ambition, more likely, Edward corrected gently. Ashgrove has long resented Blackthorn's influence over the neutral territories. The prophecy surrounding your bloodline may simply be the excuse they've been waiting for to justify open conflict. How much time do we have? Cade asked. Difficult to say precisely, Damien admitted. Days, perhaps a week at most, based on the pace of their movements. We need to prepare our defenses immediately, and reach out to allied packs who might be willing to stand with us if this escalates into full conflict. Over the following days, the estate transformed into a hive of urgent activity, warriors training relentlessly in the courtyards, messengers dispatched to allied packs across the region, and defensive preparations strengthened along every vulnerable point of the territory's borders. Elena found herself drawn increasingly into these preparations, her unique connection to the ancient bloodline granting her insights and abilities that even she was only beginning to understand. There's something else, she said one evening, finding Damien alone in his study late into the night, poring over reports from returning scouts. When I focus, really focus, I can sense things through the bond, feelings, sometimes even locations. I think it's connected to the moonlight itself, some kind of awareness, tied to lunar cycles. Damien looked up, intrigued, despite the weariness etched into his features. Show me. Elena closed her eyes, concentrating on the strange, subtle awareness that had been growing steadily since her first shift. Slowly, an image began to form in her mind, hazy, but increasingly clear. A large gathering of wolves assembled at the edge of a dense forest, their numbers far greater than the scouts had initially reported. They're larger than we thought, she said, her eyes still closed in concentration. And they're moving faster than expected. I think they intend to strike within the next 2 days, not the week we assumed. Damien's expression sharpened with alarm. Can you be certain? Elena opened her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. As certain as I can be about something I don't fully understand myself. But this feels real, Damien. Not imagination. Damien rose immediately, already moving toward the door. Then we need to accelerate our preparations. Edward, gather the council immediately. If Elena's instincts prove accurate, we have far less time than we believed. Within hours, The entire estate had shifted into a state of urgent readiness. Warriors positioned along every strategic point. Allied packs contacted with the sobering news that conflict now appeared imminent rather than merely possible. Elena, despite exhaustion beginning to weigh heavily on her, insisted on remaining actively involved in the preparations, her growing sense of connection to the bloodline's ancient power driving her forward despite understandable fear. "You should rest," Damien said gently, finding her still awake near midnight, reviewing defensive positions marked across the map in his study. "Whatever comes tomorrow, you'll need your strength." "I keep hearing that phrase a lot lately," Elena said with a tired smile, echoing words spoken to her weeks before, under very different circumstances. "But I don't think I can rest, not with so much at stake." Damien moved to sit beside her, close enough now that the careful distance they had maintained during earlier weeks felt almost unnecessary. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Elena, know that this pack, myself included, stands ready to protect what truly matters: unity over fear, and courage over hesitation. You've shown both these past weeks, more than I ever could have hoped." Elena studied him quietly, something steady and sure settling in her chest, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "I used to think being different, being marked by some ancient bloodline, was a curse. Now I think, maybe, it's simply a responsibility, one I'm finally ready to accept." "Then we face it together," Damien said softly, and for the first time since the painful rejection that had once torn them apart, neither of them hesitated when their hands found each other across the worn map spread between them, a silent promise exchanged in the quiet stillness of the night, unspoken but deeply felt. Outside, beneath a moon nearing its fullest phase, the tension of the approaching conflict hung heavily over Blackthorn territory, warriors making final preparations, allied packs beginning their journeys toward the contested border, and somewhere beyond the tree line, Ashgrove forces continued their steady, deliberate approach, driven by ambition and fear in equal measure. Elena felt the weight of what was coming settle over her, not as paralyzing dread, but as quiet, steady resolve. Whatever role the old prophecy intended for her, she would not face it as a frightened, uncertain girl any longer. She would face it as exactly who she had become: strong, capable, and finally, unmistakably, ready. Dawn broke gray and heavy with mist over the contested border, the kind of morning that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Elena stood alongside Damien and Cade at the front line of Blackthorn's assembled warriors, her pale silver fur bristling with tension as she scanned the tree line for the first sign of movement. "They'll come from the eastern ridge," Cade said quietly, his own dark form tense and ready. "That's where our scouts last confirmed their position." "Allied forces?" Damien asked. "Two packs have arrived, positioned along our southern flank as agreed," Edward confirmed, having joined them at the front lines despite his advanced age, refusing to remain behind while his king faced such danger. "A third pack sent word they would arrive by midday, though I suspect this battle will not wait that long." Elena felt the familiar heat of her wolf stirring beneath her skin, no longer frightening or foreign, but steady and purposeful. An ally rather than an unpredictable force she struggled to control. She closed her eyes briefly, reaching out with the strange, moonlit awareness that had grown so significantly over the past weeks. "They're close," she said, her eyes snapping open. "Very close. Minutes, not hours." As if her words had summoned them, the first Ashgrove warriors emerged from the misty tree line moments later, their numbers indeed far greater than initial scouting reports had suggested, a wall of gray and brown fur stretching across the horizon, with grim, determined purpose. "Hold formation," Damien commanded, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled Blackthorn warriors. "Let them come to us. We hold the advantage of prepared ground." The tension stretched unbearably as the two forces closed the distance between them, until finally, with a thunderous roar that shattered the misty silence, the battle began in full. Wolves crashed together in a chaotic storm of claws and teeth, the careful formations of moments before, dissolving into desperate, individual struggles for survival. Elena found herself swept into the chaos almost immediately, her training with Cade proving invaluable, as she met attacker after attacker with growing confidence and skill. Yet even as she fought, she remained aware of the strange, building energy within her, something beyond mere physical strength, something tied directly to the moonlight, still faintly visible through the thinning morning mist. A particularly skilled Ashgrove warrior, clearly a commander, given the deference other attackers showed him, broke through Blackthorn's defensive line, driving directly toward Elena with obvious intent. She met his charge, but his experience and raw power quickly began to overwhelm her defenses, driving her backwards step by step, despite her best efforts. "Elena!" Damien's voice cut through the chaos as he fought his way toward her, but the press of battle around them made his progress agonizingly slow. Cornered against a fallen tree, facing an opponent whose skill far exceeded her own, Elena felt something shift within her. Not panic this time, but a deep, resonant calm, as though her entire being was finally settling into the true purpose she had been searching for since her awakening. The moonlight around her seemed to brighten, gathering somehow around her form despite the overcast morning sky, and when the Ashgrove commander lunged for what should have been a decisive strike, Elena moved with a speed and precision that surprised even herself, deflecting the attack, and countering with a burst of strength that sent her opponent sprawling backward in stunned confusion. Warriors on both sides paused momentarily, witnessing the strange, silvery light that seemed to emanate from Elena's form, a visible manifestation of the ancient power the ambitious among Ashgrove had feared and coveted in equal measure. The Ashgrove commander, recognizing the shifting tide, called a hasty retreat, his remaining warriors falling back in confused disarray. Damien finally reached Elena's side as the immediate threat retreated, his relief evident, despite the continuing chaos of battle still raging around them. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Elena said, though exhaustion from whatever power she had briefly unleashed left her legs trembling. "I don't fully understand what just happened, but I think the moonlight itself responded to me." Before Damien could respond, a fresh wave of Ashgrove warriors surged forward, apparently determined to press their advantage despite their commander's retreat. Damien positioned himself protectively at Elena's side, and together, bolstered by the arrival of the promised third allied pack finally reaching the battlefield, they turned to face the renewed assault. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though in truth barely more than one had passed, until finally, overwhelmed by the combined strength of Blackthorn and its allies, and demoralized by the strange, undeniable power Elena had displayed, the Ashgrove forces began a full retreat, abandoning the contested border entirely, rather than risk further losses. As the dust and chaos of battle slowly settled, Damien found Elena sitting exhausted against the same fallen tree that had nearly witnessed her defeat earlier. Her silver wolf form shifted back into her human shape, breathing heavily but very much alive. "We held," Cade said, joining them with visible relief despite fresh wounds marking his own form. "Ashgrove is retreating, and based on what I witnessed today, I don't believe they'll risk another direct assault anytime soon." "Because of what I did," Elena said quietly, still processing the strange power she had unleashed. "Because of who you are," Damien corrected gently, kneeling beside her. "The moonlight answered you today, Elena, not because of fear or desperation, but because you finally embraced exactly what you were always meant to become." Elena looked up at him, exhaustion mixing with a quiet, profound sense of accomplishment she had never expected to feel. "I think I understand now what the prophecy really meant. It was never really about choosing between war or unity as some fixed destiny. It was about who I chose to become when the moment finally arrived." Damien reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, the gesture tender despite the exhaustion and remaining tension of the battlefield around them. "And who you've become, Elena, is exactly the kind of alpha this pack, and perhaps every pack in these lands, desperately needs." As the surviving warriors began the somber work of tending to the wounded and honoring those lost in battle, Elena felt something settle deep within her chest, not the fear and confusion that had marked her earlier days, but a quiet, unshakable confidence in the path now stretching ahead of her, uncertain in its details, but clear in its fundamental purpose. The bond between herself and Damien, weakened by rejection and tested by battle, pulsed steadily now, patient and undeniable, waiting only for the final barriers between them to fall away entirely. 3 weeks after the battle at the contested border, Blackthorn territory had settled into a fragile but genuine peace. Ashgrove, humbled by their defeat and the undeniable display of ancient power that had turned the tide against them, sent formal envoys seeking terms of peace rather than risk further conflict against a pack now openly supported by multiple allies across the region. Elena stood once more in the Great Hall, though everything about this moment felt entirely different from the humiliation she had endured there weeks before. The same council members who had once watched silently as she was cast out, now sat attentively, many with expressions of genuine respect and gratitude rather than suspicion. Damien stood beside her on the raised platform, his posture carrying the quiet confidence of a leader who had finally learned the cost of choices made from fear rather than trust. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled hall. I stood in this exact place and made the gravest mistake of my life, rejecting the woman fate had chosen as my true mate, believing distance could somehow protect her from a destiny she had not yet even discovered. Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the gathered council, many recalling vividly the very scene he described. I was wrong, Damien continued, not simply in my judgment, but in my fundamental understanding of what true strength requires. Strength is not found in isolation or fear-driven decisions. It is found in trust, in facing uncertainty together rather than alone. He turned to face Elena directly, and though they stood before the entire council, his attention seemed to narrow entirely onto her alone, as though no one else existed within the vast hall. Elena Voss, I publicly, and without reservation, reverse the rejection I once forced upon you. You are not a threat to be managed, or a danger to be kept at a careful distance. You are not a threat. 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 Elena felt her breath catch, emotion swelling within her chest, as she looked out at the assembled faces watching this pivotal moment unfold. Damien, she said softly, though her voice carried clearly in the silent hall. 3 weeks ago, I walked out of this room, believing I would never return, believing the life I had known was over completely. I have learned since then that endings are rarely as final as they seem, and that sometimes, what feels like the deepest betrayal can become the foundation for something far stronger, if both people are willing to do the difficult work of rebuilding trust. She reached out, taking his hand in front of the entire council, a gesture that drew quiet, approving murmurs from the assembled crowd. I choose you, Damien Blackthorne, not because fate or ancient prophecy demands it, but because I have watched you fight for me, protect me, and humble yourself before your entire pack to correct a mistake most leaders would never openly admit. That is the kind of partner, and the kind of alpha, I am proud to stand beside. The hall erupted into genuine, heartfelt applause, a stark contrast to the tense, uncertain silence that had marked Elena's exile weeks before. Edward, watching from near the front of the assembly, allowed himself a broad, satisfied smile, clearly relieved to see the painful chapter of recent weeks finally reaching its rightful conclusion. As the formal proceedings concluded, and the council began the joyful, celebratory business of preparing for what would soon become a proper bonding ceremony between their king and his true mate, Elena found herself pulled gently aside by Cade, who offered her a warm, genuine smile. You've come further than anyone in this pack could have imagined, in less time than most would think possible, he said. I'm proud to have played even a small part in helping you find your way here. You did far more than a small part, Elena corrected warmly. You believed in me from the very beginning, even when I barely understood what I was becoming. I won't forget that. That evening, as the estate settled into a rare, peaceful calm, Elena walked once more through the familiar gardens, pausing beneath the same old oak tree that had witnessed her first, terrifying shift weeks before. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting its familiar silver glow across the peaceful grounds, though this time, rather than fear, she felt only a deep, settled sense of belonging. It's strange, she said softly, as Damien joined her beneath the tree's spreading branches, how much has changed since that first night. I was so frightened then, of everything, of what I was becoming, of what it might mean for my future. And now? Damien asked, gently taking her hand. Now I understand that becoming something powerful doesn't mean losing yourself, Elena said. It means discovering exactly who you were always meant to be, and choosing, every single day, to use that strength wisely. Damien studied her in the moonlight, love and admiration evident in every line of his expression. The prophecy spoke of a choice that would determine unity or devastation for every pack across these lands. I believe, without any doubt, that the choice was always yours to make, Elena, and I am endlessly grateful you chose unity, chose strength tempered by compassion, rather than allowing fear to dictate the outcome. We chose it together, Elena corrected gently. You could have continued running from what frightened you. Instead, you faced your council, faced Ashgrove, faced your own mistakes, and chose to fight for something better. That matters just as much as anything I've done. As they stood together beneath the ancient oak, bathed in soft moonlight that seemed to bless their reunion with quiet, timeless approval, the weight of ancient prophecy and painful rejection finally gave way to something simpler, more profound, a genuine partnership, built not on fear or destiny alone, but on hard-won trust, courage, and an unwavering commitment to face whatever the future held, together. In the weeks that followed, Blackthorn territory flourished under the combined leadership of Damien and Elena, their bond fully sealed and celebrated by a pack that had come to genuinely respect and admire the woman who had once been so unjustly cast aside. Ashgrove, humbled and cautious, maintained careful peace along the border, while allied packs across the region began speaking of Blackthorn's queen with growing reverence, the moon-blessed wolf, who had chosen unity over vengeance, strength over fear, and love over the isolating grip of ancient prophecy. Elena Voss, once an unremarkable servant girl, hiding a secret even she barely understood, had become exactly what fate, in its patient and often mysterious way, had always intended, not merely a queen bound by prophecy, but a woman who had claimed her own destiny through courage, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of second chances. And beneath the same moon that had witnessed her painful exile, her fearful awakening, and her ultimate triumph, Elena finally understood that the greatest victories are rarely found in avoiding life's hardest moments, but in facing them fully, and discovering, against all odds, exactly who you were always meant to become.